Welcome back to Full Send Ministries. This month we're going to be diving into the book of Exodus. Over the next 4 weeks we're going to be taking a closer look at not only the people involved, but also the activities that took place. And along with that, we're going to be looking at giving God thanks. In all situations, in all circumstances, God is in control, and we need to give Him thanks in all of it. Today, however, we're going to be looking at giving God thanks for deliverance. In this context of Exodus, we obviously know of the events that took place, but we're also going to be looking closer at the things that took place and the way that the people interacted with God and the thanks that they gave Him, but also the other side of that, the thanks that they did not give Him for the certain things that took place. In Exodus 1, we see that the Israelites were growing in numbers, and this caught the attention of Pharaoh. His instructions to the Hebrew midwives were to kill all the baby boys when they were being born, but to let every baby girl live. Surely they gave thanks to God for the faithfulness of the midwives when they disobeyed Pharaoh's orders and did not carry out those orders. This, of course, led to Pharaoh's second order in verse 22, which says, every Hebrew boy that is born will be cast into the Nile, but let every girl live. Thus we come to the birth of Moses in Exodus 2. He, of course, was born during this time frame of Pharaoh's edict about the little boys being thrown into the Nile. But his mother put him in a basket coated with tar and pitch and placed him in the reeds along the banks of the Nile. We, of course, see that Pharaoh's daughter comes across little baby Moses. And this, when she saw him crying, she felt sorry for him. I'm sure that Moses' parents were quite thankful for God's deliverance in saving their son, but also the sorrow that would come with knowing that they wouldn't be able to raise their own son themselves. In Exodus 3, we see the beginning of the actual deliverance of the Israelites out of Egypt. We see Moses' interaction with God through the burning bush. Moses is receiving the commissioning from God to free the Israelites from Egypt. This conversation between God and Moses gets a little intense, and Moses questions his own abilities multiple times. And in Exodus 4:13, Moses finally says, "Please send someone else." I can imagine his feelings about that. God was quite upset with Moses. However, rather than eliminating Moses from his plan, God delivers a helper, his brother, Aaron. We see Moses and Aaron trying to convince Pharaoh by whatever means necessary, the various signs and wonders that God had enabled them to do. However, some of the time, Pharaoh's magicians and sorcerers were able to do the same thing. But I need you to look at the consequences that happened after those miracles and wonders took place. In one instance, Pharaoh increased the workload of the Israelites. He also took away the straw that they needed to produce the bricks. Now they would have to collect their own straw, thus adding to the workload even more. The Israelites groaned under this additional burden, and Moses went to the Lord asking why such things were taking place. Chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. Then Moses went back to the Lord and protested, "Why have you brought all this trouble on your own people, Lord? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh as your spokesman, he has been even more brutal to your people, and you have done nothing to rescue them." God's reply comes in chapter 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God's deliverance has been declared. Over the course of the next 4 chapters, we see repeated attempts by Moses and Aaron meeting with Pharaoh. This involves 9 plagues that God inflicts upon Egypt, trying to persuade Pharaoh to release the Israelites from slavery, but to no avail. Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he refuses to release the Israelites. It's easy for us to look at the events that took place in the midst of all the plagues that God put into place in order to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But it's too easy for us to look at the story, then the events that took place, and look at the ending of the story that we can see so clearly. And we wonder why the Israelites acted so poorly at certain times. I need you to step back from that perspective. Put yourself into their sandals, who were stuck in the midst of this. The Israelites have known nothing but slavery and bondage for the past 400 plus years. They have dreamt long of being free once again. But the answer to those prayers doesn't ever seem to come to fruition. Now here's Moses and Aaron trying to convince Pharaoh to let them go. But instead, their burden gets worse. I don't know about you, but I would have done some grumbling as well. The Israelites see the plagues that God inflicts upon the Egyptians and how, as God's people, they are exempt from them. Could it be that deliverance is on the horizon? Then in chapter 11, we see the final blow delivered by God to ensure the deliverance of his people. The 10th and final plague will be the death of every firstborn son in Egypt. You remember the exemption given to the Israelites in order to ensure that they did not suffer the same loss? The Passover. The Israelites would take the blood of the lamb they had sacrificed and put it on the sides and the tops of the door frames of their houses. Chapter 12, verses 29 and 30. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, and there was not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh immediately orders Moses, Aaron, and the Israelites out of Egypt. They left in a hurry, but not without God's provision. Chapter 12, verse 36. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for, so they plundered the Egyptians. Not only had God delivered the Israelites from Egypt, but also given them many different things for the journey that lay ahead. How about that for a fairy tale ending? But that's not it. Pharaoh realizes the great loss of labor that he has given up, so he decides to pursue them. And over the next 25 days, they finally catch up to the Israelites who were at the border of the Red Sea. We see God's deliverance show up in a big, big way. With the Israelites trapped up against the Red Sea and the pursuing Egyptian army, we see one of the biggest miracles take place, the parting of the Red Sea. It says in chapter 14, verses 21 and 22, Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their left and on their right. In true dramatic fashion worthy of any good movie, we see the Egyptian army pursue the Israelites into the dry seabed. Verses 24 through 28. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had pursued the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. God's deliverance. I'm sure the Israelites were quite thankful for it. How about you? What has God delivered you from? Have you thanked him for it? Much like the Israelites, you are, or maybe you have been, calling out to him, asking for him to deliver from whatever is enslaving you. Do not lose heart. Stay faithful. Stay committed to him because he has not forgotten you. Like a sign I saw on a billboard nearby, your current struggles right now will be your testimony later. Take heart. God will deliver you. And when he has done so, you will have the opportunity to thank him personally.